The Galactic Exchange Academy prided itself on offering an expansive curriculum to bridge cultural understanding across the galaxy. Students from over 50 star systems converged to learn about one another's worlds, customs, and ecosystems. Yavrid Kaln, an earnest graduate student from the Andolian cluster, found himself inexplicably fascinated by Earth, a planet known for its erratic weather, strange gravitational pull, and an infamously unpredictable species: humans. Yavrid's professor, the venerable and stern-bodied Leandor Volk, had assigned him to the subject of Earth's apex predators. It seemed straightforward at first. Earth was rife with terrifying creatures: sharp-toothed sharks, stealthy leopards, venomous cobras, and colossal grizzly bears. As Yavrid pored over the initial data, he chuckled nervously. The humans were remarkably fragile compared to these predators. Yet somehow they thrived, spreading across the planet like a stubborn fungus. Their tenacity was impressive but baffling. How could such a vulnerable species subjugate a world full of predators? Yavrid prepared himself for weeks of analysis. His focus sharpened on the predators most intertwined with humanity's rise: wolves, once enemies and now allies; horses, powerful and tamed. But one anomaly consistently crept into his research logs: Felis catus. Cats. His initial review yielded strange results. While wolves and horses had served practical purposes in humanity's rise, cats seemed useless. They lacked the brute strength of wolves or the endurance of horses. Their primary role, it seemed, was pest control. But that was an insultingly low bar for creatures labeled as predators. Yet, for reasons Yavrid couldn't yet fathom, humans adored them. It was puzzling. Even the phraseology surrounding them defied logic. Domestic cats. How could such an obviously predatory species be domesticated? With growing curiosity, Yavrid petitioned the Academy for permission to conduct in-person field research. This request wasn't unusual for students studying Earth. What surprised his advisor was Yavrid's specific interest in cats. Leandor gave a dismissive wave of his appendage and approved the plan, though he warned Yavrid to tread carefully among humans. They were prone to emotional outbursts, especially when discussing their pets. Within days, Yavrid found himself descending to Earth in a climate-controlled pod. His designated human liaison was an amiable zoologist named Dr. Peter Carver. Peter greeted Yavrid with an enthusiastic handshake, an Earth custom Yavrid found awkward and vaguely aggressive. "Yavrid, welcome to Earth," Peter said, his voice warm. "I hear you're here to study our big scary predators, eh? Lions? Tigers? Grizzlies?" "Not quite," Yavrid replied, his tone cautious. "I'm here to study cats." Peter blinked. "Cats? Like house cats?" "Precisely. Felis catus." Peter stared at Yavrid for a moment, then burst into laughter. "You're serious? Well, you're in for a treat. Cats are, let's just say, an experience." The human's reaction was unsettling. It hinted at a truth Yavrid hadn't yet grasped. Their first stop was a suburban neighborhood just outside Denver. Yavrid was given a modest home to stay in, complete with a living space, a research terminal, and, curiously, a small room equipped with plush furniture and assorted dangling toys. Peter explained this was cat-friendly lodging. Yavrid's first feline subject, a sleek black cat named Midnight, was waiting for him. Midnight lounged regally on a cushion, her golden eyes fixed on Yavrid with an intensity that sent a shiver through his spiracles. Yavrid approached cautiously, deploying his translation module. "Greetings, Predator," he said in a series of carefully modulated frequencies. Midnight yawned. Peter leaned against the doorframe, smirking. "You're going to need more than a translator to understand cats, my friend." Over the next few days, Yavrid observed Midnight with meticulous detail. Her behavior oscillated between languid disinterest and sudden bursts of energy. She would pounce on toy mice with terrifying precision, only to lose interest seconds later. What baffled Yavrid most was her relationship with Peter. Midnight would nuzzle against Peter's legs, purring, a sound that registered on Yavrid's equipment as both soothing and manipulative. This predator, though physically unimposing, seemed to exert an almost hypnotic control over its human. "How do you tolerate this?" Yavrid asked Peter one evening as Midnight perched on the couch like a queen surveying her domain. "Tolerate?" Peter chuckled. "We love them. Cats are, well, they're companions, but they're predators. Surely you understand the risk. Peter laughed harder. Risk? Midnight couldn't hurt a fly. As if to prove a point, Midnight pounced on an unsuspecting moth that had wandered into the room. She dispatched it with a single swipe of her claw, then sauntered away as if nothing had happened. Yavrid stared, his antennae twitching with unease. Weeks passed, and Yavrid's research expanded. He visited homes, shelters, and even a cat cafe, a place where humans paid money to drink beverages while interacting with multiple cats. The scenes he encountered ranged from endearing to outright bizarre. He watched humans dangle strings for cats to chase, willingly allow their furniture to be shredded, and endure sudden, unprovoked attacks during playtime. One particularly unsettling moment occurred when Yavrid met a tabby named Whiskers. Whiskers was curled on his human's lap, purring contentedly. Without warning, the cat bit down on the human's hand. Not hard enough to injure, but enough to elicit a startled yelp. "Why do you allow this?" Yavrid asked, horrified. The human shrugged. "That's just Whiskers. He gets a little overstimulated sometimes." Yavrid's notes grew increasingly frantic. The data defied logic. Cats were predators, yes, but they displayed an unsettling blend of cunning, arrogance, and unpredictability. Yet humans adored them, even when they exhibited behaviors that should have been considered hostile. His findings culminated in a presentation to Peter, complete with charts, behavioral analyses, and video footage. "I believe humans are underestimating the threat posed by Felis catus," Yavrid concluded. "These creatures have manipulated you into providing food, shelter, and even entertainment. They exhibit classic predatory dominance." Peter shook, his head laughing. "Yavrid, you're overthinking it. Cats aren't dangerous. They're just quirky." "Quirky," Yavrid repeated, the word alien in his mouth. He wasn't convinced. The turning point came when Peter invited Yavrid to accompany him to a wildlife reserve where feral cats had become a problem. The reserve's director, a stern woman named Claudia, explained the issue. "Cats are natural hunters. When left unchecked, they decimate local bird populations. It's why feral colonies are such a concern." Yavrid's spiracles flared. "And yet you keep them as companions?" Claudia sighed. "Because they're also lovable, independent, and frankly, irresistible." Yavrid was beginning to suspect humanity suffered from a collective delusion. One evening, back at his lodging, Yavrid observed Midnight in a new light. She stalked a laser pointer's dot with the grace of a born killer, her eyes alight with predatory focus. When the dot disappeared, she turned her gaze to Yavrid, unblinking. For the first time, he felt like prey. Midnight jumped onto the table where Yavrid's research terminal rested. She nudged his data tablet off the edge with a deliberate paw, then stared at him as if daring him to protest. Yavrid didn't move. Peter found him hours later, still sitting rigidly at the table. Midnight was curled in his lap, purring like an engine. "She's chosen you," Peter said with a grin. Yavrid didn't respond. He was beginning to realize the horrifying truth. Humans hadn't domesticated cats. Cats had domesticated humans. Yavrid Kaln had studied countless predator-prey relationships across the galaxy, but nothing compared to the unsettling reality of Earth's domesticated felines. The longer he observed them, the more convinced he became that humans were either blind to their own subjugation or, worse, willing participants in it. Midnight had taken full possession of his temporary residence. She no longer waited for permission to claim his lap, his work surface, or even his bed. On more than one occasion, Yavrid awoke to find her sitting on his chest, her unblinking golden eyes scanning his face as if she were measuring his usefulness. Peter found Yavrid's paranoia amusing. "You're acting like she's a warlord," he said one morning over coffee. "She exerts dominance over my living space, demands food at irregular intervals, and sabotages my research equipment," Yavrid said, motioning to his tablet, which now bore distinct claw marks on its screen. Peter only laughed. "That's just cat ownership. You get used to it." Yavrid's spiracles flared. "That is precisely what concerns me." To gain a broader perspective, Yavrid expanded his research beyond domestic settings. He interviewed veterinarians, behavioral scientists, and cat enthusiasts. He examined historical records, tracing humanity's relationship with cats back to ancient Egypt. where they had been worshipped as gods. This discovery did not ease his concerns. If anything, it confirmed his worst fears. These creatures had been revered for millennia, their influence stretching across human civilization. One particularly harrowing study led Yavrid to a retired zoologist named Richard Albright, who had spent decades researching large predators before settling into a quiet life with 6 cats. "You want to know why we keep them?" Richard said, scratching behind the ear of an elderly tabby sprawled across his lap. "Because they let us." Yavrid took a moment to process the statement. "You're implying humans have no true authority over them?" Richard chuckled. "Son, if you think you own a cat, you're mistaken. Cats tolerate us. They choose to stay because we make life convenient for them." Yavrid's spiracles tightened. "Then why do you continue to serve them?" Richard sighed, looking down at the purring creature in his lap. "Because they're charming little devils. They make us feel special, like we've earned their trust. There's something addictive about it." Addictive. Yavrid added the word to his growing list of disturbing human-cat dynamics. The next phase of his research took him to an animal shelter, a facility where humans voluntarily cared for abandoned or stray cats. Yavrid was horrified to learn that, despite the creature's predatory nature, humans went to great lengths to ensure their safety and well-being. Shelters provided food, medical care, and, most bafflingly, affection. "These creatures should be considered a planetary infestation," Yavrid muttered to Peter as they walked through rows of enclosures filled with cats of all sizes and colors. Peter sighed. "You're missing the point. Cats aren't a problem. They're companions. They are predators, Peter. Predators you willingly allow into your homes." Before Peter could respond, a staff member approached, carrying a small, trembling kitten wrapped in a blanket. "We just got this little guy in," she said. "He was found alone. Barely survived the cold." Peter immediately softened. Poor thing, he must have been terrified. The staff member gently handed the kitten to Peter, who cradled it with surprising tenderness. Yavrid watched in disbelief. This tiny predator, despite its underdeveloped claws and fragile frame, had already evoked protective instincts in a fully grown human. The kitten let out a faint mewl, and Peter melted. "See, Yavrid, how could you call something like this a threat?" Yavrid kept his distance, watching as the kitten nestled into Peter's chest. He could already see the pattern forming. This was how it started. The small, helpless appearance, the soft fur, the tiny, innocent sounds. And then, before long, the human would be enslaved. Their final stop in the shelter was the socialization room, where volunteers interacted with cats awaiting adoption. Yavrid stayed near the entrance while Peter stepped inside. The moment Peter entered, the cats turned their collective gaze upon him, their tails flicking in what Yavrid had come to recognize as calculated assessment. Peter laughed as a plump orange tabby immediately leapt onto his shoulders. "This is Jasper. He loves people." Yavrid watched in horror as Jasper began kneading Peter's shoulder, an action that appeared affectionate but, upon closer examination, looked eerily like an assessment of muscle density. Another cat, a sleek gray female, wrapped herself around Peter's legs, cutting off his movement. "They're testing you," Yavrid whispered. Peter rolled his eyes. "They're being affectionate." Yavrid disagreed. He had seen footage of Earth's larger feline predators, lions working together to isolate prey, jaguars studying movement patterns before striking. This was no different. If these cats had been just a fraction larger, Peter would have been at their mercy. That night, Yavrid sat alone in his lodging, processing his findings. Midnight was curled beside him, tail twitching in her sleep. He had witnessed enough. Humanity's relationship with cats was not one of ownership, but servitude. He composed his preliminary report to the Galactic Exchange Academy, outlining his concerns. He included footage, behavioral analysis, and a disturbing hypothesis. If humanity's greatest predators had not been domesticated, but had, in fact, domesticated humans, then Earth's entire ecosystem was at the mercy of creatures who controlled their caretakers with psychological precision. He hesitated before sending the report. Would the Academy take him seriously? Would they see what he had seen? Or would they, like the humans, fall under the spell of these creatures? Before he could decide, Midnight stretched, let out a low purr, and pushed his tablet off the table. Yavrid exhaled slowly. He was beginning to suspect that no one, alien or human, would ever be free from them. Yavrid Kaln had studied some of the most terrifying predators across the galaxy. Razor-clawed subterranean burrowers, creatures that liquefied their prey, even beings that hunted with electromagnetic pulses. But never, in all his research, had he encountered anything as deeply unsettling as Earth's so-called domesticated felines. It was no longer a hypothesis, it was a fact. Cats had not been tamed by humans. They had infiltrated human society, shaped their behavior, and subtly, relentlessly, ensured their own dominance. And no one seemed to care. Since compiling his preliminary report, Yavrid had received no response from the Galactic Exchange Academy. That, in itself, was alarming. The Academy prided itself on swift academic correspondence. Had the data been intercepted, suppressed, worse, had the Academy dismissed his findings outright? Meanwhile, Peter remained blissfully unaware of the horrifying implications. "You're overthinking this, buddy," he said one morning, sipping his human coffee as Midnight coiled herself around his feet. "You're making it sound like cats are running some kind of covert operation." Yavrid's spiracles twitched. "You think they lack the intelligence?" Peter grinned. "Oh no, they're smart, but they're not masterminds." Yavrid gestured toward Midnight, who had settled on a high shelf, staring down at them with the quiet patience of an apex predator. "Then explain her behavior. She monitors my every move. She sabotages my work. She demands sustenance at inconsistent intervals. These are not the actions of a companion. These are the actions of a ruler." Peter laughed. "She just likes messing with you." Messing, another deceptively harmless human word masking a deeper truth. Yavrid suspected this was how it happened. How every human, without exception, fell under their control. The slow, deliberate erosion of their authority. The illusion of choice. And finally, complete submission. Determined to prove his theory, Yavrid arranged for an off-world communication session. He traveled to a secured research facility where he could transmit his findings directly to the Academy's senior committee. Inside the transmission chamber, he connected with Dr. Heilran Vex, a highly respected biologist from the Neldrin system. The alien's elongated form flickered into view on the screen, compound eyes glistening. "Yavrid Kaln," Dr. Vex greeted. "We received your report. It is extensive." Yavrid leaned forward. "Then you understand the urgency." Dr. Vex hesitated. "The committee has reviewed your concerns. However, we find your conclusions implausible." Yavrid's spiracles tensed. "You don't believe the data?" "The data is undeniable," Dr. Vex admitted. "However, the conclusion that these creatures exert control over an intelligent species." "Then explain this," Yavrid interrupted, transmitting a live feed of Midnight lounging in his workspace, sprawled across his research documents, tail flicking lazily. "She interferes with my work. She takes the most advantageous resting positions. She has trained me to provide sustenance at her convenience. This is not coincidence." Dr. Vex made a thoughtful clicking noise. "Perhaps you are over-identifying with the subject?" Yavrid recoiled. "You think I'm compromised?" It is not uncommon for researchers to grow fond of their study subjects. A chilling thought struck Yavrid. The committee had not dismissed his findings because they lacked merit. They dismissed them because they had already been influenced. How many humans had visited the Galactic Exchange Academy over the years? How many had brought their feline overlords with them? It was possible, no, likely, that the Academy itself had already been infiltrated. The transmission cut out suddenly. Yavrid stared at the blank screen, his thoughts racing. If the Academy would not act, he had to find another way. He spent the next several days compiling additional evidence, this time focusing on the most damning proof yet, the fact that humans would alter their lives to accommodate their feline overlords. He recorded footage of humans sacrificing entire sections of their homes to elaborate cat structures. He documented humans apologizing when their own pets attacked them. He filmed the ultimate horror, a human willingly choosing to remain uncomfortable rather than disturb a sleeping cat on their lap. This is clear submission, he muttered to himself as he reviewed the footage. And yet, no matter how much evidence he gathered, he couldn't shake an unsettling truth. He was no longer just an observer. Midnight's control over his life had become undeniable. He prepared his meals in a way that suited her schedule. He worked in locations that she deemed acceptable. He had even, unthinkably, begun to enjoy her presence. Late one night, as he sat in his dimly lit quarters, composing what he knew would be his final report, Midnight leapt onto his desk. She moved with silent precision, settling directly between him and his terminal. Her golden eyes locked onto his. Yavrid did not move. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out a single paw and placed it over his hand. It was not an attack. It was not a demand. It was something far more terrifying. It was acceptance. Yavrid swallowed hard. He understood now. It was too late for him. He had been claimed. Yavrid Kaln had devoted his academic career to understanding apex predators. Yet he had failed to predict the most insidious danger of all, his own assimilation. Midnight had won. The realization settled in as he sat motionless in his quarters, the feline's paw resting lightly atop his hand. This was not an act of affection. It was a statement, a quiet, undeniable declaration of ownership. He should have resisted, should have withdrawn his hand, reasserted his authority, reinforced the reality that he was the researcher and Midnight was the subject. But he didn't. Instead, he remained still, allowing the creature to continue her calculated display of control. He was compromised. And yet, despite knowing this, despite recognizing every subtle behavioral manipulation for what it was, he felt no fear, no resentment, only a strange, creeping sense of inevitability. Midnight stretched, retracting her paw, and flicked her tail against his arm as she hopped off the desk. Yavrid exhaled slowly, staring at his unfinished report. He had set out to prove that humans were under feline influence, that their relationship was not one of companionship, but subjugation. He had gathered irrefutable evidence, compiled hours of footage, analyzed behavioral patterns, and none of it mattered, because he now understood the final, most terrifying truth. Humans did not resist because they did not want to resist, even with full awareness of their own submission. They chose to remain under feline rule. It was not coercion. It was willing surrender. The implications sent a chill through Yavrid's spiracles. If an entire species, one as tenacious and unpredictable as humanity, could be tamed without force, without threats, without fear, then what did that say about the true power of Felis Catus? He needed to leave. That thought snapped him into motion. He had to get back to the academy, present his findings in person. A report could be ignored, dismissed, buried. But if he stood before the committee, if they saw him, saw what had become of him, they would understand the depth of the threat. Yavrid hastily gathered his equipment, shoving data tablets into his travel case. He activated his communicator, preparing to arrange transport. But before he could send the request, a soft sound behind him made him freeze. A purr. Low, steady, deliberate. He turned slowly. Midnight was perched on his suitcase, her golden eyes unblinking. Her body was relaxed, but her tail flicked with measured intent. She did not hiss, did not growl. She didn't need to. A deep, primal part of Yavrid's brain understood exactly what was happening. This was a test. A final confirmation of where his loyalty lay. If he moved her, if he defied her claim, he could still escape, still finish what he started. If he didn't... Midnight let out a slow blink. A small, insignificant gesture. Yet Yavrid had seen it replicated across human interactions. The way they softened in response. The way their resistance faded. The way they melted. His hand hovered over his suitcase. Move her. Leave. Finish the mission. But he didn't. His fingers curled back. His posture eased. Midnight yawned and stretched, stepping off the suitcase as if dismissing him entirely. As if she had allowed him this final illusion of choice. Yavrid sat back down. His communicator remained untouched. The suitcase remained unpacked. And as Midnight leapt onto his lap, curling into a contented ball of warmth and quiet victory, Yavrid Callan, the once proud scientist, the once relentless seeker of truth, lowered a hand to scratch behind her ears. Not because she commanded it, not because he was forced, but because, like every human before him, he chose to. The last line of his report remained incomplete, because in the end, there was nothing more to say.